The 1950s were packed with musical talent, but not all of it made it into the history books. Some of the most compelling acts from that era have been quietly overlooked, their contributions fading while lesser-known contemporaries claimed the spotlight. Here are 20 groups who helped build the decade's sound and deserve to be heard again. Number 1. The Bunnies. When the Bunnies stepped onto the scene, they did not ease their way in. They arrived with energy, style, and a set of harmonies that felt immediate and alive. These were young musicians who dressed sharp and sang sharper, delivering songs that balanced melody with an undeniable edge. In a decade that produced no shortage of vocal groups, they found their own lane and stayed in it. What connected them to their audience was something beyond the music itself. Their songs reflected a restlessness that was everywhere in the culture, a desire to move past the old ways and into something freer. For the young people listening, the Bunnies sounded like a voice for their own generation. They may not appear on many lists today, but the stylistic choices they made and the attitudes they brought to the stage rippled forward into the work of groups who followed them. Number 2. Bill Haley and his Comets. Bill Haley was the kind of frontman who made a room feel different the moment he started playing. His feel for rhythm guitar was natural, and his voice had a quality that made crowds want to move. The musicians he gathered around him were every bit his equal. Franny Beecher played lead guitar with a precision and fire that made his riffs impossible to ignore. Billy Williamson layered in a country flavor through his steel guitar work. Johnny Grande gave the group its melodic spine on piano. Marshall Lytle anchored the low end on bass, and Dick Richards hit the drums with the kind of force the music demanded. When Rock Around the Clock appeared in 1954, it landed like something had been uncorked. Haley's vocals, Beecher's guitar, and the band's locked-in rhythm created a sound that felt genuinely dangerous in the best possible way. It was not just a hit record, it was a declaration, and its reach went far beyond American borders. Bill Haley and his Comets carried rock and roll to audiences around the world at a time when most people outside the United States had never heard anything like it. Number 3. The Everly Brothers. Don and Phil Everly arrived in 1956 already knowing exactly who they were. Wake Up Little Susie and Bye Bye Love hit teenagers like a recognition, melodies and words that seemed to describe their own lives back to them. Even in modest venues with uneven sound, the brothers' conviction came through completely. None of that was accidental. They had been singing since childhood, performing alongside their parents Ike and Margaret on radio broadcasts throughout the 1940s. Music was not something they learned, it was something they grew up inside. Their natural talent attracted serious attention in Nashville while they were still in high school, including from Chet Atkins, whose support helped open national doors. The next major step came in 1960 when they signed with Warner Brothers Records. Almost immediately they released Kathy's Clown, a song they had written themselves, and it became the kind of hit that defines a career. It reached the top of the charts, sold 8 million copies worldwide, and became their biggest record ever. It also holds the distinction of being the very first single Warner Brothers released in the United Kingdom, a small historical footnote that speaks to just how far their appeal extended. Number 4. The Penguins. Doo-wop at its best had a lightness to it, a sense that music could be joyful without being shallow, and the Penguins understood that instinctively. Songs like Walking Down Broadway, I Knew I'd Fall in Love, Be Mine or Be a Fool, Kiss a Fool Goodbye, and Yuki Uki were built for street corners and school gymnasiums, full of the pleasure of singing together and being young. But Earth Angel was the song that made history. What started as an R&B record crossed every boundary in front of it, landing on pop charts and in the hearts of listeners who had never sought out that kind of music before. Its lyrics were simple and its harmonies were gorgeous, and together they created something that felt universal. Earth Angel became the slow dance of the era, the song you associate with a particular kind of youthful longing that does not really change from one generation to the next. The Penguins made it, and it still works the same way it always did. Number 5. The Coasters. What made the Coasters different was that they understood entertainment in a complete sense. Their music was excellent, a natural fusion of R&B groove and rock and roll spark. But their live performances went further, weaving humor and theater into every show until the whole thing became an experience rather than just a concert. Their songs were small dramas: Yakety Yak, Charlie Brown, Run Red Run, Little Egypt, and Along Came Jones each told a story with a point of view and a punchline. These were not generic pop records. They were character pieces, sharp observations about everyday life delivered over rhythms that made it impossible to stay still. That combination of something to listen to and something to feel in your feet is what sent their records up the charts across audiences that did not otherwise have much in common. The Coasters knew how to reach people, and they did it consistently. Number 6. The Crickets. Out of Lubbock, Texas, in the mid-1950s, the Crickets built something that still sounds vital today. Buddy Holly sang and played guitar with a style that split the difference between country ease and rock and roll confidence. Nikki Sullivan held the rhythm together on guitar. Joe B. Malden anchored the bottom on bass, and Jerry Allison drove the whole thing forward on drums. That'll Be the Day was the record that announced them to the world, and it did so with authority. It had Holly's voice, the band's chemistry, and a swagger that was entirely its own. Tragedy came in February of 1959 when Holly died in a plane crash. The loss was staggering, but the Crickets continued, bringing in new members and carrying the music forward, ensuring that what they had started would not simply stop. Number 7. The Platters. Los Angeles in 1953 was where the Platters began taking shape. Tony Williams brought a lead tenor voice of genuine power. David Lynch added his own tenor to the blend. Alex Hodge provided the baritone weight, and Herb Reed laid down the bass foundation. When Zola Taylor joined later, her contralto voice completed what felt like a perfectly balanced ensemble. Manager Buck Ram secured them a deal with Mercury Records in 1956, and the first release was Only You, a song of quiet elegance that connected immediately with anyone who heard it. The harmonies were effortless, and the lyrics were tender without being cloying. They followed it with The Great Pretender, which showcased a more dramatic side of Tony Williams' voice and stayed at the top of the R&B charts for 11 weeks. The group even performed both songs in the film Rock Around the Clock that same year. What followed was one of the most consistent runs of the era. The Magic Touch, My Prayer, You'll Never Know, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Twilight Time, Enchanted, Harbor Lights, and I Love You 1,000 Times each found their audience and held it. The original group entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990 and the Vocal Group Hall of Fame in 1998. Number 8. The Clovers. The Clovers came out of Armstrong High School in Washington, D.C., where Harold Lucas, Billy Shelton, and Robert Woods started singing together in the mid-1940s. Lucas coined the group's name and initially led it, but when John Buddy Bailey came on board with his strong tenor voice, he gradually moved into the lead position while Lucas shifted to baritone. The group drew inspiration from the Orioles and the Ravens and spent time developing a vocal sound that was tight, energetic, and built to last. Hits like Don't You Know I Love You and One Mint Julep established them early on the R&B charts. In 1955, they released Blue Velvet, a more restrained and emotional record that showed another side of what they could do, reaching number 14 on the R&B charts. Devil or Angel followed and became their biggest chart success, reaching number 3. Somewhat ironically, those two later records ended up being the ones that lingered in listeners' memories the longest, even though they represented a departure from the up-tempo style the group had been known for. Bobby V's subsequent recording of Devil or Angel eventually became the more familiar version for many people, but the Clovers made it first. Number 9. Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps. Bebop-A-Lula in 1956 was the moment everything clicked. The song had an energy that felt barely contained, with Vincent's voice riding over a rhythm that pulled you in from the opening notes. It became a rockabilly standard almost immediately. The Blue Caps were a serious band, not just a vehicle for their frontman. Cliff Gallop's guitar work defined their sound as much as Vincent's voice did. His solos crackled with invention and gave the records a signature quality that set them apart from everything else on the radio. Rhythm guitarist Willie Williams, drummer Dickie Harrell, and bassist Jack Neal completed a rhythm section that gave the music its drive. Vincent's personal life was marked by hardship. A devastating leg injury from the same car accident that killed Eddie Cochran, combined with years of relentless touring and struggles with alcohol and drugs, took a serious toll. He died at 36. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998, and the Blue Caps received their own induction in 2012, recognitions that honor what they contributed to a genre they helped define. Number 10. Billy Ward and his Dominoes. Most of the great R&B band leaders of the era came up through gospel or the club circuit. Billy Ward came through classical training in the concert hall. He had studied music formally, earning credentials from the Art Institute of Chicago and Juilliard, where he later taught voice. He had worked on Broadway. When he assembled the Dominoes, he drew from his own pool of former students and shaped the group with the precision of someone who understood music from the inside out. Clyde McPhatter's high tenor was the centerpiece, supported by Charlie White, Joe Lamont, and the deep bass of Bill Brown. Their debut recording, Do Something For Me, reached number 6 on the R&B charts in early 1951. Their next single, 60-Minute Man, went all the way to the top in May of that year and made inroads on the pop charts as well. The song's suggestive content made it controversial, but that only seemed to drive more people toward it. Number 11. Flatt and Scruggs and the Foggy Mountain Boys. Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs were not trying to reinvent the wheel. They were trying to honor where they came from while finding out how far the music could actually go. Drawing on Appalachian folk tradition and weaving in threads of blues, country, and gospel, they built a bluegrass sound that felt both ancient and immediate. Radio and television appearances through the 1950s brought them to audiences far beyond the regional circuits where bluegrass had traditionally lived, and their regular presence on the Grand Ole Opry gave them a national platform. Their spot on the Martha White Flower radio program reached millions of listeners. Their most widely known contribution to popular culture remains The Ballad of Jed Clampett, written for the television show The Beverly Hillbillies. The song reached the top of the Billboard charts and introduced bluegrass to a generation of Americans who encountered it through their living room television sets. Number 12. The Drifters. Ahmet Ertegun and Clyde McPhatter built the Drifters from the ground up in 1953. McPhatter's voice was extraordinary, full of gospel intensity and natural charisma, and the group's early recordings, including Money Honey and Such a Night, established them quickly as a serious R&B act. When Benny King came into the group, he brought something different, a warmth and emotional openness that gave the songs a new kind of intimacy. There Goes My Baby in 1959 became their first #1 record, a sophisticated blend of doo-wop harmonies, gospel phrasing, and pop construction that pointed in a direction most other acts had not yet found. This Magic Moment, I Count the Tears, and Save the Last Dance for Me followed, the last of those also reaching the top of the charts in 1960. When King departed for a solo career, Rudy Lewis stepped in and the hits continued. Up on the Roof, On Broadway, and Under the Boardwalk became some of the most enduring records of the early 1960s. The Drifters entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. Number 13. Little Richard and the Upsetters. The energy that Little Richard brought to a stage was unlike anything else happening in popular music at the time, and the Upsetters were the band skilled enough to hold that energy in place and give it shape. Together, they produced records that nobody else could have made. Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, Good Golly Miss Molly, and Lucille fused gospel fervor with rock and roll propulsion and something from R&B that made the whole thing feel alive in every direction at once. But they were also doing something forward-looking. Rip It Up and Keep a Knockin' introduced rhythmic elements and syncopated patterns that would go on to define the funk movement in the 1960s and 70s. Little Richard and the Upsetters were not just products of their era. They were laying groundwork for what was coming next. Number 14. Johnny Otis and his Orchestra. Johnny Otis had been a presence in R&B since the 1940s, leading a band that drew on blues, jazz, and swing in equal measure and combined them into something that felt genuinely modern. Players like Wynonie Harris, Charles Brown, and Illinois Jacquet gave the orchestra real depth, and their signature recording, Harlem Nocturne, showed exactly what they were capable of. A cool, almost hypnotic melody anchored by Jacquet's saxophone and Otis's confident piano. But Otis kept moving. In the early 1950s, he developed an interest in Latin music, specifically the mambo, and began exploring what would happen if you ran that rhythmic approach through an R&B sensibility. The answer was Mambo Boogie. In 1951, the first R&B mambo record ever recorded. Its pulse was irresistible, its melody was memorable, and it opened a door that many artists would eventually walk through. Number 15. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. Hank Ballard came into the Midnighters through an invitation from Johnny Otis, joining a group that at various points included Jackie Wilson and Lawson Sonny Woods among its members, both of whom would go on to significant careers elsewhere. That alone tells you something about the talent concentrated in this group. Their first hit, Get It, appeared in 1952 with raw energy to spare. Work With Me, Annie followed in 1954 and created a genuine cultural moment. Radio stations banned it, which only made teenagers more determined to hear it. It spent 7 weeks at the top of the R&B charts and nearly crossed into the pop top 20. Annie Had a Baby and Sexy Ways extended the run. The Midnighters were the most openly provocative R&B group of their time, and young audiences responded to that honesty with fierce loyalty. Their influence on the rebellious spirit running through rock and roll is direct and undeniable. Number 16. The Isley Brothers. In 1954, 4 brothers from a musical family formed a gospel quartet. Ronald, Rudolph, O'Kelly, and Vernon Isley sang together with a natural blend that reflected years of shared life and shared faith. Then, in 1955, Vernon was struck and killed by a car while riding his bicycle. The loss was devastating, and it could easily have ended the group before it really began. Instead, the remaining brothers continued. Ronald became the lead voice, and the group shifted from gospel into the world of R&B and rock and roll. They moved to New York in 1957 and spent 2 years recording without breaking through commercially. The turning point came in Washington, D.C., during a performance of Lonely Teardrops. In an unplanned moment, Ronald called out to the crowd, and the crowd called back. An RCA executive in the room understood immediately what he had witnessed and signed the brothers on the spot. The song they built around that moment was Shout, a call and response record driven by Ronald's voice and an irresistible rhythm. It did not immediately crack the mainstream charts, but over time, it became one of the most covered songs in American popular music. Number 17. Johnny Burnett and the Rock and Roll Trio. Memphis, in the mid-1950s, produced a particular kind of rock and roll energy, and this group was one of its clearest expressions. Johnny Burnett's voice was powerful and direct. His brother Dorsey's bass playing had a physical snap to it that kept everything moving. Guitarist Paul Burleson pushed his instrument into territory that most players had not yet explored, using distortion and tremolo effects to create sounds that felt almost ahead of their time. The group signed with Coral Records after moving to New York and recorded 25 tracks between 1956 and 1957. Their debut album, released in December of 1956, captured a raw, almost reckless creative energy that holds up remarkably well. Their version of Train Kept a-Rollin' remains a defining document of the rockabilly era, its distorted guitar and relentless tempo foreshadowing a harder rock sound that would not become standard for another decade. Their influence traveled far, reaching the Ramones on one end and Led Zeppelin on the other. Number 18. Sir John's Trio. Chuck Berry's guitar playing and storytelling get most of the credit for the records that carry his name, and that credit is deserved. But the piano playing of Johnny Johnson, who anchored Sir John's Trio, was every bit as essential to what those records became. Johnson's boogie-woogie foundation and blues vocabulary gave songs like Maybelline, Roll Over Beethoven, and Johnny Be Good their structural backbone and much of their emotional weight. His playing did not just support Berry's guitar work, it shaped it, gave it something to push against and respond to. The interplay between them is what makes those recordings feel alive rather than simply well executed. Johnson spent years as one of rock and roll's most consequential unsung contributors, his role understood by musicians but rarely discussed publicly. His induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001 was a correction of a long-standing oversight. Number 19. Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. Few moments in 1950s pop music were as immediately striking as the opening of Why Do Fools Fall in Love? The song arrived in 1956 with a melody that burrowed in immediately and a lead vocal from 13-year-old Frankie Lymon that was both innocent and startlingly assured. It went to the top of the R&B charts and crossed over into pop with ease. The group that surrounded him, Herman Santiago, Jimmy Merchant, Joe Negroni, and Sherman Garnes, gave the record its harmonic richness and the live performances their staying power. More hits followed. I Want You to Be My Girl, I Promise to Remember, Goody Goody, and Little Bitty Pretty One all found audiences, and the group appeared in two films, Rock, Rock, Rock in 1956 and Mr. Rock and Roll in 1957. In 1957, Lymon left to pursue a solo career at 15. His voice had changed with age and never recaptured the quality that had made him so remarkable. His later years were difficult, marked by substance abuse, and he died in 1968 at 25. The sadness of that ending does not diminish what came before. His influence on the teenage pop that followed, including the early Jackson 5, was direct and clear. Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. Number 20. The Five Royals. The Five Royals occupy an interesting position in music history, a group whose songs became more famous through other people's versions than their own. James Brown and Aretha Franklin turned Think into a soul landmark. Ray Charles recorded Tell the Truth with deep feeling. Dedicated to The One I Love became a pop hit twice over through the Chordettes and the Mamas and the Papas. That says something important about the quality of the songs the Five Royals were writing in the early 1950s, even as their own recordings stayed largely within the R&B world. Baby Don't Do It and Help Me Somebody were tight, strong records with harmonies that held up, and a guitar sound courtesy of Lymon Pauling that was sharper and more aggressive than most of what was coming out around them. Pauling's style has been cited directly by Steve Cropper as a formative influence, and the lines connecting his playing to blues rock are easy to trace. The group's presence at King Records during James Brown's earliest recordings also seems to have left a mark. Brown's early cover of Think is practically a declaration of that influence. The Five Royals disbanded in 1965, never quite achieving the sustained chart presence their talent warranted, but the music they made and the music they inspired is part of the permanent record.